Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. I often speak to parents about how apologies are not just for guilty people, or bad people, or people who should be ashamed of themselves, but instead, apologies are potentially the most effective relationship repair tool known to humankind. I talk about how a good apology can be the one thing that will open a door that's been slammed and welded shut. But still, I find that many parents are hesitant to embrace apologizing to their estranged adult child. So I've thought a lot about why this is, and I've come up with what I'll call the 4 horsemen of the apology. These are things that get in the way of parents making use of this incredibly effective tool. I'm sure I'll talk in future episodes about the elements of effective apologies, but today I want to explore the barriers so that you can start to see some of the things that can get in the way of repairing your relationship with your estranged adult child. Because make no mistake, you have so much power to do that, even if you don't feel confident in your ability to do so. These 4 horsemen I'm going to talk about today are just from my observation and thinking about what might be going on. This is not based on any kind of research, just my clinical observation from working with hundreds of people around this topic of family estrangement. The 4 horsemen of the apology are things that get in the way of parents using the power of a good apology to make solid repairs in relationships that may be sorely in need of repairing. And the 4 horsemen are, in descending order of severity, trauma, low self-esteem, fear of vulnerability, and concerns about fairness. The most severe and troubling barrier to apologizing is trauma. And I'd like to think this is the smallest group. It's certainly the smallest group of people I work, I think, because these parents don't always reach out for help. And when they do, they don't necessarily trust me. And this notion of apologizing to your child is probably the number one reason for that. Without going too deeply into the subject of complex trauma, where you've been injured early and often in your life by adverse childhood experiences, your brain develops differently. So rather than having access to all that your mind might be capable of, your brain is constantly on the alert for threats. Physical and psychological threats to your well-being. You can't really process complex information very well because everything goes through a filter of, is this a threat? If it seems like a threat, there's a swift rejection that shuts down whatever it is, be it a thing, a person, or even an idea. The threat with suggesting an apology may be a threat to self-image, self-worth, self-esteem. The suggestion might feel like you're bad and you should be ashamed of yourself. But I think more importantly than that, many people with complex trauma were made or expected to take the blame for their own abuse when it was happening. And they rightly and wisely resisted taking that responsibility. Because of their trauma history, their child's hurtful behavior today may feel like abuse to them all over again. And of course, they're going to resist the suggestion of taking even an ounce of responsibility for being abused. This is the right instinct. But unfortunately, the past is being overlaid onto the present, and it keeps these parents from being effective in their relationships with their children. It's really tough to unravel, and it explains the rage, I think, that sometimes accompanies these parents' protests against apologizing. So that's probably the most severe form of resistance to apologies. It comes from trauma, and it makes a lot of sense. This brings me to the 2nd horseman of the apology, which can be one of the results of complex trauma, and that's low self-esteem. This is another thing that can make apologizing harder than it needs to be. You don't have to have been traumatized to have low self-esteem, of course, so this is probably a bigger group of people. As we go down the list, probably more and more people will be included in these groups. Low self-esteem tells us, if I apologize, that means I made a mistake. And if I made any mistakes in parenting, it's because I'm a terrible parent. And if I'm a terrible parent, it's because there's something wrong with me as a person. That awful feeling goes to the core of a person's identity. The prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning part of the brain, understands that an apology is just a tool for relationship repair. But at the same time, there's this overwhelming shame that makes apologizing super hard. So while the person with low self-esteem might want to get her mind around the idea of an apology, it's just so hard because of the feelings that it evokes. And in this case, apologizing might be delayed. If this sounds like something you're experiencing, therapy is a wonderful antidote to low self-esteem. I highly recommend it. But if you don't want to do that or can't afford it, just make sure to surround yourself with people who treat you as the worthy person that you are. The third horseman of the apology is fear of vulnerability. This is shared by many people who grew up without any model of what apologies look like in the wild and how things can improve with a good apology. They may appreciate the idea of how effective a good apology would be if they can come up with one, and they may even be able to tolerate thinking about some specific things they want to apologize for. Their self-esteem is not so injured that they can't process the apology they'd like to give. The barrier for these parents is the following thought. If I apologize, my apology can be used against me. I'll be giving them ammunition. This strikes me as one of those fears that are pretty much entirely just that. Fears, not facts. Let me do a little experiment with you. Let me show you what a good apology feels like on the receiving end. Let's say we're friends and we had lunch together yesterday and I said something that really hurt your feelings. I'm going to apologize to you for that. I'm so sorry for what I said to you yesterday. I was careless with my words and I really shouldn't have been. I know that's a sensitive topic and I really should have been more thoughtful than I was. I am so very sorry. As you listen to me apologizing to you, how much do you feel like I'm a jerk? How much am I coming across like a bad person by apologizing to you? A good apology feels good to the recipient, and it tends to melt the ice. At the very least, a good apology will halt any negative escalation. The fear of apologizing comes from the fear of being vulnerable. Because it does take vulnerability to apologize well. You're giving the other person a piece of yourself, but you'll never know how much your willingness to be vulnerable is valued until you take the risk of being vulnerable with an apology. The fourth and last horseman that makes apologies hard is universal. I guarantee you will identify with this. And that is our human desire for fairness in all things. If your child has cut ties with you, chances are that has hurt your feelings at least a little bit. You could maybe use an apology yourself for some of your child's behavior. To be asked to apologize to someone who's treating you like dirt feels supremely unfair. And it is. It's perfectly okay, by the way, to wish that things were fair. We value fairness in our culture. That's why we cut the third cookie in half if we've got 2 kids and 3 cookies. That's why games have rules and why nobody likes a cheater. We uphold fairness as a value in our society. We were all raised to expect and desire fairness, so there's nothing wrong with wanting that. But as the person who wants to reconnect, it's up to you to apologize if you want to try to open the door. Is that fair? No. Will it work? Possibly. It will at least give you a chance at opening a dialogue. So the fact that you've been hurt and are going to apologize to the person who's hurt you is unfair. And it's a fact that everyone who utilizes the relationship repair tool of a good apology just has to tolerate. Everything worthwhile is uphill, according to John Maxwell, including repairing important relationships. It's a slog. It's not easy. That's why so many relationships languish for years and don't get better, is because no one wants to do the hard work of making important repairs. So please remember that a good apology is good practice for anyone who wants to repair or improve a relationship with just about anyone. I hope you've gained some insight into what may come up for you when you're attempting to use an apology with your child. Just knowing your challenges, I feel, is the first step to overcoming them. The 4 horsemen, again, were trauma, low self-esteem, fear of vulnerability, and a desire for fairness. Each of these can get in the way of your being effective in your relationship with your child. So figure out which one or ones of these might be an obstacle for you. The first 2 can be vastly improved with good therapy, and the second 2 are more a matter of finding the courage and the will to overcome them. If you feel you have been traumatized and you're living with complex trauma, please seek help from a trauma-informed therapist. Get someone local. In-person therapy is the gold standard and much better than looking at a face online. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.